listeners, and welcome back to your most favoritist and hatedest podcast, Hindsight is Horrifying. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Darth Jader, and with me is my co-host, Jason.
Hello, everybody.
Yes, welcome back, listeners. We actually have a bit of a different episode for you today because this is the first episode where we are actually discussing a program that geezer Jason over here, who just had his big birthday. Tell him how old you turned, Jason.
I can't remember. I'm that old.
Oh, goodness. The Alzheimer's has already kicked in.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. So we better get...
I just celebrated the first anniversary of my 39th birthday.
That is such a woman thing to say. That is such a mom thing to say, Jason.
I'm 40 and proud of it, you
Woo!
bunch of young bastards.
Hey, Anthony Jeselnik is 40. 40 is a sexy integer to be if it's Anthony Jeselnik's age, so I'd say you're safe. Regardless.
Okay, I'll take it.
Hey, Anthony Jeselnik is beautiful. Anyway, in case you're listening, Anthony, I love you. But anyway, so it is a bit of a different program today because we're discussing a show that I had never seen previously to my research for this podcast, and it's called Night Court. So, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about this ancient programming that you used to love in your very distant childhood?
Yes. In the long, long ago.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Tonight we are talking about Night Court, which is one of my all-time favorite TV shows. Not only is it one of my favorite shows, but it's probably the first show that at least I can remember as a kid where my parents let me watch it, and I had the feeling that a lot of the jokes were going over my head. And of course, I went back later on, years later, and watched it and found out that, oh my God, this is the dirtiest show.
The show is filthy.
It really is.
It's ridiculous.
It's a filthy show. Night Court, it is considered to be an 80s show, which is fair because it premiered in 1984, but it actually ran into the 90s, ran 9 seasons.
Which is impressive for the 80s.
Yeah, it's one of those shows that just lasted forever. In fact, it was actually it was either canceled or everybody expected it to be canceled 1 season short of 9, and they had actually written an ending for the show, but then NBC came back and actually renewed it for another season.
Woo!
Because of course in the early 90s, this was in that sort of the period between the great legendary shows of the 80s and the great legendary shows in the 90s. So it was sort of a desert in 91. I don't think Friends wasn't on the air yet.
No, Friends came on the air several years after that. But this show, it did last till 1992. And the basic summary on Google is... An eccentric, fun-loving judge presides over an urban night court and all the silliness going on there. Judge Harold T. Stone presides over Night Court, a court which deals with petty crimes which can be dealt with in a dime-a-dozen manner.
Criminal Court Part 2 is now in session.
And the dime-a-dozen actually fits in well with one of the episodes we saw today. We watched episode 9 of Season 4 called Earthquake, which we're watching right now in the studio, and... given the 80s and like early 90s nature, they got away with some slightly racist stuff on the show, like the sumo wrestlers only being able to speak fast food.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
That's not a racist thing. That's a fat person thing.
That's sizist.
That's because,
sorry, listeners.
Yeah, that's because obviously anyone who doesn't speak English but who is fat would know how to say Big Mac and things like that.
Yep. They're fluent in fast food.
Right. Interesting thing about this show is that it almost didn't premiere at all.
Interesting.
It was in the 1983, 83 season. Mm-hmm. It was not one of the shows that NBC had decided to pick up and make into a series. It ended up being a mid-season replacement. That's why it actually premiered in January of 84, because every single show that had been commissioned in 83 had been canceled by mid-season.
Oh, so this was like, hey, smoke them if you got them. We gotta make a replacement somehow.
We need a show. We need a show in a hurry. And I think this is one of the shows that really highlights. The 80s was one of the golden eras of the sitcom, in the sense that a situational comedy where people would sit around and they would say, hey, what is a cool situation?
Give me an occupation, farmer.
Yeah. Well, in a real sense, Cheers. It's a bar in Boston that's run by a former baseball player. There. Make a show out of that.
Yep, just run with it. Well, they definitely have that. This show definitely has that kind of an air, especially with. It's not even like a slapstick kind of humor show, which a lot of the 80s still had dredges of that going on, but the show is just so zany, which is surprising for the 80s, unless I'm just incorrect, considering I was born in the late 80s, but it's just so off the wall.
Well, it is. It's definitely different than like, a Cosby Show, we're not really supposed to talk about anymore.
No more pudding pop jokes. It got weird, kids.
Yeah, I guess we can't do the Cosby Show or any of that stuff because that's just totally tainted now. Night Court never was. As far as I know, none of the characters or none of the actors or anybody from Night Court.
They were smart enough to keep their scandals under wraps like you should.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Harry Anderson, he just passed away last year.
And Harry Anderson plays the judge, right?
Yeah,
Judge
Harold T. Stone, the judge who became a judge because the outgoing mayor wanted to fill as many slots as possible, and Harry Stone was the only one who answered the telephone that night.
Oh, so he's not a judge like Judge Reinhold is a judge?
He has not received acting's highest honor.
Oh, damn. No bananas in the tailpipe for this judge, ladies and gents.
No, and that's actually based on a true story. Reinhold Weege, which is a real name, he's the late Reinhold Weege. He's the guy who created Night Court.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And which is actually, that ended up being a joke on the show because Dan Fielding, who, and we'll talk more about Dan a lot, but Dan Fielding, it was eventually a joke in one of the episodes that his real first name was actually Reinhold.
Oh my God! So there is a real Judge Reinhold.
There was a, it was oh my God, this is so embarrassing that your name is Reinhold. And, they make a joke about it at the very end. And then as soon as they make the joke, they freeze frame and the credit comes up created by Reinhold Weege.
Oh, my God.
But no, this one, like I was saying, this is one of the classic sitcoms where, people who like shows like this, you can sit around and go, okay, it's a courtroom comedy in New York. At night, it's Night Court, and nothing's ever really all that serious.
No, it's all misdemeanor kind of court, and it's just silly little cases that come through.
Right.
But one of the first jokes I noticed by an actor that helped me immediately relate to the show, and let me know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, John Larroquette.
Larroquette. That's Dan.
He's the lawyer, but
who also directed a lot of episodes. In fact, he directed. No, he didn't direct Earthquake. Earthquake was directed by Jeff Millman, who directed an episode of Community.
I love that you know that. He's not even looking at his computer right now, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, Jeff Millman directed the episode of Community that, for those of you who are listening, who are civilized, people who've watched Community, good, decent human beings.
He's poking fun at me right now because I've never seen Community, and apparently I need to correct my errant ways immediately.
It's very shameful. He directed the episode of Community where the multiverse was first introduced. The episode where they were deciding who should go and open the door for the pizza delivery guy, and they kept rolling a die.
That's a great story.
It's a fantastic episode. So there's a connection there. And if he directed that, there's at least a chance he has an association with Rick and Morty, but I haven't found it yet.
Well, the reason why I connected with him immediately, I actually recognized John Larroquette from Parks and Recreation because he plays Leslie's mother's former love interest from when Leslie's mom was like 18.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, when there's a Valentine's Day dance when April and Andy are kind of falling for each other, and all that's going on in the background. The Parks and Recreation gang has a Valentine's Day dance, and John Larroquette was the lifeguard that saved Leslie's mom from a riptide at the beach, and it's just this big romantic
That's
story.
really cool.
Yeah, it's the first. The episode's actually called Galentine's Day, but that's where I actually recognized him from because I had never seen Night Court before.
Yeah, he's done a lot of stuff, and he's, after Night Court, he sort of flew under the radar. He was actually offered a spinoff from Night Court.
I believe it because he's kind of the rascally scoundrel character on the show, especially like with this episode, and it's a joke that I would have missed as a kid. Getting back to our core concept, but he's talking to his girlfriend, and the episode is obviously labeled Earthquake, and he's hitting on this woman in the court saying, "Oh, I'll make the earth move for you later." And then when he kisses her, the earth literally moves because there's an actual earthquake. So as a kid, you're like, "Oh, that's funny," but you didn't get the first portion of the joke where he's talking about rocking her world later after Night Court is over.
Well, I mean, the whole Dan Fielding character is primarily about not just sex, but sleazy sex.
Big time.
Yeah, I mean, there was the episode New Year's Leave.
Oh, yeah. Which I watched on accident in research for this show.
Which is a great episode.
It was.
That's got Harold Gould, Dr. Harold Gould.
Judge Harold Gould. Everybody's a judge now. Including the Reinhold.
So everyone's a judge? Okay.
I'm just I'm throwing back to Judge Reinhold.
In that episode, one of the great lines, one of the things in that episode is that it's New Year's Eve, and there's a guy who is dressed in the New Year's Eve baby outfit, so he has a top hat and a diaper on. And he escapes, and Aristotle Nostradamus Bull Shannon.
Dear God. That's his racehorse name.
Played by Richard Mall, who's a great guy. He asks Dan, he says, "Where would you be if you were in a diaper, where would you be?" And Dan says, "At home entertaining a few friends."
That's like a Tuesday. You can't phase Dan with that kind of stupid question. But I mean, even the kids on this show are kind of dirty because getting to the earthquake episode, you've got the judge hosting a very small portion of a class. These 3 students who are, I'd say they're like, 10, 11-ish?
Yeah, something like that.
They're hovering around there. But there's this one kid that the judge bonds with because he's a little rapscallion type, and this one woman is talking about, "Oh, I'd put on my old cheerleader's uniform or something," but it only goes up to here, and this little 10-year-old boy looks at her and he's like, "I'd give you $10 to see you in that uniform." And
that was the same kid who was trying to look up her skirt with mirrors on his shoes.
Yeah, he's a little gangster. He's he's got scams.
No, there were so many jokes. I can't. They're kind of running together, but I know on one of the episodes I watched, the B story is basically about Dan trying to become a donor at a sperm bank.
Oh, Lord.
Now, bear in mind...
It's neither of the episodes that I watched.
I'm trying to remember which episode that one was, because that was an interesting one, because the lady who ran the sperm bank was actually the librarian from the opening scene in Ghostbusters.
Oh, and she's burned into your memory as... from your story from the previous episode where that scared the hell out of you.
And she's trying to recruit Dan to be a sperm donor, and of course, she says, "Have you ever had your sperm tested?" And he says, "What you mean by a professional?"
Well, there are all sorts of sort of sleazy jokes like that, because even in the earthquake episode with the 3 kids, they're accompanied by a teacher, and I think one of my favorite jokes of this episode was. A misdemeanor comes into the court because of a live sex act that they performed, and the little girl looks at her teacher. She's like, "What's a live sex act?" And the teacher is all embarrassed, but she's like, "Well, Mary, we'll discuss that on career day." And I was just like, "Good God!"
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what was the sex act. Who were the characters? Was it? Not the actors, but what was the joke there?
The thing is, this person has like a box of quote unquote sex toys.
That's
and
right.
Dan picks it up because he's been tasked with taking it to evidence, and he's starting to like pick through it, and he's like, "Oh, an egg beater. When will people learn how to use the right tools?" And I was just like, "Oh God."
Yeah, and then no one but a horrible human being would dare to show these things in a courtroom in front of children, and he just reaches in.
Like you do. But it gets even better because they, Dan and the bailiff, I guess she is, Roz? Roz, okay. Well, because there's a stupid bailiff who's basically pre-Hodor and pre-Yarp. Yeah, that guy. But regardless, Roz gets stuck on the elevator with 2 sumo wrestlers and a lawyer, Dan.
Yeah.
Which is just the start of a really bad dad joke. But at one point, with the earthquake happening over and over again, Roz is in the elevator with Dan, who's got the box full of sex toys in his arms, and she goes, "Well, I guess we'll just have to find a way to entertain ourselves." And she looks in the toy box. Any way we can. This show is just downright filthy.
And it's interesting, the what I tell, or what I've told people before about Night Court, and this plays pretty seriously into the does it hold up equation. Whenever I first decided to go back and watch episodes of Night Court, the first couple seasons they're awful.
They're on an Alf sort of level, but you mentioned that before recording, that it sort of Seinfelds up a little bit as it goes on.
Well, and the thing is that the reason for that is that in the entire cast, very few of the actors were on the show for all 9 seasons. Harry Anderson was, Richard Mall was.
That always makes sense on an ensemble show, though.
Yeah, and it took a while to fine-tune the show. The weird thing is that after the original bailiff, the sort of foil to Bull, was Selma. I don't remember what her character's name. The actress was Selma Diamond.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see her. I only watched the 2 episodes though for the episode.
She died of lung cancer right after season 2, and
like you do,
and they got another actress, Florence Hallop, something like that.
Okay.
Flo. They replaced Selma with Flo. And after season 3, Florence died of lung cancer.
Oh.
And it was actually a really big deal when Roz came on the show, because Bull, and it was kind of interesting because they weren't making it up. I mean, these people had literally died, and Bull was like a dog who had been abused. He was like, what if I become friends with the next one and she dies too?
Oh no.
And that was one of the reasons why they brought on Marsha Warfield as Roz, because they wanted to just completely get away from that the little dainty old lady sort
from the
of
typical
character.
image. Just switch it up a little bit. Sure.
Yeah, and they went with this tough as nails younger bailiff, and Roz, she's one of the characters that made the show. When Roz got there,
I love Roz.
Oh, she's fantastic. Markie Post, I think Markie Post was she was the 3rd public defender also. I think they went through 2 public defenders before her also.
Okay.
And what's weird is when you go back and watch like season 1 and 2, you see them trying to do the love interest story between Harry and the public defender, but you know that character is not going to be there in a season. So it feels very weird. It feels very tacked on because they're just doing this because they think they need to do it. So the show really, it wasn't until about the 4th season that the show became the show as we know it.
Yeah, it took a while to gel with all the moving pieces, as it were.
Right.
So that's interesting. Sort of talking about that empathetic quality with all of that real story happening behind the fake story. The show does have kind of a a sweet quality to it.
Oh, yeah. It's got a heart. It definitely has a heart.
For sure, because when they do get trapped on the elevator, and like I said, 2 sumo wrestlers, a bailiff and a lawyer, get on an elevator. Yeah. But Dan, who's always like so confident and, you know, quick with his wit, just doesn't care about anything, but he gets on the elevator and he starts freaking out. And at first, Roz is treating him like an errant child, like, Dan, shut up, come on, get over it. And then she absolutely bitch slaps him at one point. But
well, that's the thing. Roz sees through Dan's bullshit.
Yeah, because they get off the elevator toward the end of the whole escapade, and after the sort of bumbling, fumbling handyman sort of Fonzies the elevator with a sledgehammer. Art's
great.
But he
because whenever something goes well, it's a work of art.
Oh God, that was a Burt Reynolds kind of laugh right there, Jason.
I watched Smokey and the Bandit this weekend with my son.
Eastbound and down. Oh, it's never too soon, ladies and gentlemen, to teach your kid how to, you know, run liquor across the border.
Yeah, well,
or beer, as the case may be.
Beer, yeah.
Hey, moonshiners, we're in Georgia, man. So
Jerry Reed's character from the Smokeyverse.
Oh God. Anyway, it's delightful.
Good luck. What was that when Family Guy? Whenever Stewie, what did he say to Burt Reynolds? Good luck tapping that hot.
Oh, that
Field.
hot Sally Field ass.
Shut up! I'm not even happier about it than you are.
Just zooms off,
which is so terrible because she's so cute in Smoking the Bandit.
I was about to say she was beautiful. Yeah, not that she's not a beautiful lady now.
That was a weird joke for for them to do.
Yeah, but Seth MacFarlane, what are you gonna do? He's got to make fun of everybody no matter what.
He's an interesting guy. He's a very interesting guy,
to say the least. He would have been great on Night Court.
You know, he's good friends with Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh's been on Family Guy.
Yeah, they're.
I think more than once.
Yeah, they're politically. It just I love that because it just goes to show you that it doesn't matter what your politics are, you can still be friends.
Right.
You know. In fact, I think when. What was it? Rush Limbaugh had a heart attack, and he said the first person to call and check on him was Seth MacFarlane.
Aww.
And I was like, that's cool. You know,
that's sweet.
But anyway, getting back to Night Court.
Yeah, we're actually approaching the end to the first episode that we watched. So the sumo wrestlers make it out alive, and Dan does too. And Roz has that nice little moment where she was giving him a tough time on the elevator for his claustrophobia and his paranoia, but then. They're like, wow, Dan, I guess you got everybody through the situation. And Roz is like, yep, Dan really held it together. Yeah. And she just sort of taps him on the shoulder and walks away. And it was a very sweet moment.
Yeah, that's a real, that is a real, signature aspect of a good 80s show is that, they...
You give each other a hard time, like 99.9% of the time, right. But when the rubber hits the road, you know who your friends are.
And you could always... There was always a difference between a show that has a heart and a show that's just schmaltzy, that just, they just layer it, paint some sugar on it, and.
Oh yeah. Friends actually did a great example of that when, the Friends group, Chandler, Phoebe, all the gang is in Monica's living room and they're watching Three's Company. And Chandler's being Chandler, and he goes, oh no, I think this is the episode of Three's Company where there's some sort of misunderstanding. And Phoebe takes him literally and goes, oh, well, then I've already seen this one. And she just turns it off. And that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. Because some of some of the older shows, it's just a rearrangement of nonsense every week for a half hour, and that's all it is. But this show, like you said, it has more substance and heart to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, you really... It was interesting, too, because this show was... this was in the Cheers era, it was in the Cosby Show era, and you could always sort of tell that that the powers that be were trying to push a sort of, Sam and Diane kind of thing.
Well, because for whatever reason, production always seems to think that there has to be a love interest to make a show interesting.
Right.
And that's just not so.
Yeah. I think Cheers actually was the show that first really did that kind of irritating thing it's been done now 1,000 times. I mean, the Ross and Rachel thing.
Oh God, don't get me started on Ross and freaking Rachel.
Well, Ross and Rachel was basically just Sam and Diane.
Yeah.
Just done all over again.
Well, and New Girl, I think, actually makes fun of that in a way because Zooey Deschanel's character actually has an on-again, off-again relationship with a man named Sam, and he leaves her for a girl named Diane. So I thought that was pretty perfect when that happened.
Is it Zoe or Zooey? Is Zoe?
Zooey Deschanel, yeah.
Okay. I love her.
Well, yeah, back when I had bangs in college, people used to tell me, you know who you look like? And I didn't have cable, and I couldn't afford I couldn't afford anything back in college, but people would look at me when I was a bartender because I had bangs and glasses.
Wait.
They're like, you look like the chick from New Girl. And I was just like, oh.
Wait, when was that show on?
Show's been on for quite a while.
Oh, man. God,
well, and then I'm not nearly as old as you are. So.
Yeah, I was about to say. Well, that's like the episode of Community where Shirley mentioned Sam and Diane.
Well, and they did a sort of Parks and Recreation thing with New Girl, just like they did, because Parks and Recreation, there was like there was a significant gap between the second to last and last seasons, and the same thing happened with New Girl. They like jump into the future or something, so it's...
Oh, that's interesting.
There's kind of a time gap either way.
Yeah, but there was an episode of Community where Shirley mentions Sam and Diane, and Allison Brie looks at Donald Glover, was like, who are Sam and Diane? And Shirley's like, we get it, you're young.
Yeah, shut up, young people. Well, it's funny because like I grew up watching stuff like Wonder Years, Dick Van Dyke, all in the Nick at Night network. Oh, fantastic shows.
Dick Van Dyke, one of the greatest television shows.
I hop around an ottoman in a casual way whenever I can.
I know. I still do that.
Absolutely.
I will absolutely do the Dick Van Dyke thing. That just to show you, okay, the Dick Van Dyke Show is separated from Night Court by, it's a few decades.
I was about to say, I'm not sure where you're going with this.
But just to show you, Night Court, you have an episode where a guy is talking about trying to get into a sperm bank for $100 a throw because he can, quote, defile himself into a Porsche by the end of next year.
Oh, Jesus.
In the Dick Van Dyke Show, there was a big issue with the fact that they wanted Mary Tyler Moore to wear pants.
Yeah.
And the compromise that they worked out, and if you go back and watch, I think they eventually dropped it, but I know in the first few seasons this is the case. At least one scene of every episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show, Mary Tyler Moore has a dress on.
Yeah. Well, there were all sorts of negotiations like that back in the day. Like
the two-bed thing.
The two-bed thing, how on I Love Lucy she wasn't allowed to say the word pregnant when she literally was pregnant with her and Desi Arnaz's kid.
Yeah.
They had to say, oh, Lucy's having a baby.
When the two of them got a divorce, my grandmother cried for like 3 days.
That was almost equivalent for Elvis dying for a lot of people of that generation.
Yeah. I mean, it was inconceivable that Lucy and Desi could get a divorce.
Inconceivable!
One of the things we talked about, and I don't remember which episode it was, but we talked before, it might have been in the Ghostbusters episode, about New York in the 80s.
Yes.
By the way, have you heard the Ghostbusters news? This is an update to a previous episode. This is breaking news.
Yep, that they are bringing back the OG cast of Ghostbusters for another Ghostbusters movie. Yeah,
Ghostbusters 3 is happening. Sony got its ass handed to it so bad by the Paul Feig remake of Ghostbusters. It was such a failure.
With the women?
Yeah.
Yeah,
huge failure.
It didn't get a good
Well, it was a
response.
Paul Feig, I actually like Paul Feig. I feel like I would probably be friends with Paul Feig. But he produced the Joel McHale show with Joel McHale, which ran for 2 seasons on Netflix until Netflix stupidly canceled that show, which amazes me because that show had to have cost them about $15 an episode.
Which is funny because now Netflix is picking up stuff from the Lifetime network, like You. Which is actually a fantastic show, and I recommend watching it because it.
What is it?
It's literally called You. It's got Penn Badgley from Gossip Girl, so I know right out of the starting gate, a lot of you are going to be like, "Shut the hell up! I don't want to watch this." But it's actually.
I was literally just thinking, "Shut the hell up! I don't want to watch this."
Yeah, see, I'm a mind reader. I'm a witch. But yeah, it's they're coming out with all sorts of unique material, including the Ted Bundy tapes and whatever else. But for whatever reason, they canceled the Joe McHale show.
Yeah, so. I can only think that there was something going on behind the scenes that got that show canceled. Like, did Paul Feig manage to piss somebody off?
Or did Joe McHale do something equivalent to Shark Party, like Anthony Jeselnik? Who knows?
I don't know. Joel McHale, he strikes me as not the sort of person to. He's a smart guy. He I don't think he's gonna do something terrible to wreck his career. I know Paul Feig.
Maybe he threw the Shark Party.
Well, Paul Feig. I know Dan Aykroyd said that he would. What was it? Dan Aykroyd said like Paul Feig would not be welcome at Sony again.
Oh my!
Because
I'm not aware of this beef at all.
Yeah, because when they made the Ghostbusters movie, the new one, the reboot, reimagination, the reimaginactament.
I was just about to say that. Electric Love.
The greatest song. I watched that episode yesterday.
I watch that show every day of the week. It's amazing.
No, but they had apparently told him that they wanted to. They said, "You're going to need to film this, 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 and this," and he said, "No. I don't want to," and then they ended up having to go back and do reshoots and cost them a bunch of money and et cetera, et cetera.
As happens.
But the news is that apparently Ivan Reitman, who directed Ghostbusters,
the OG version,
the movie Ghostbusters, his son Jason Reitman will be directing Ghostbusters 3.
Oh.
Ivan Reitman will be the executive producer.
Okay.
And I think Ivan Reitman is I think he's co-writing the script, or co-written, because I think the script's already written.
Really? Because I think we should venture back and do the original Dan Aykroyd version where he's traveling through time and space with a Harry Potter style wand and just
I would pay
creaming some monsters.
Yeah, I would pay money to see that.
Yeah, that needs to happen.
But what I was saying, how this ties into Night Court, is that whenever I talk about New York in the 80s...
Ah, yes.
There is no greater example of what New York in the 80s was than Night Court. Because, I mean, if you just watch the opening credits with that fantastic music, I mean, it's
so 80s it hurts.
I absolutely, I adore the music, the opening theme.
Should I play it or will we get sued?
I think we're... Yeah. Well, I mean, this is for educational purposes.
We're not sure about the licensing, so just don't tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell NBC.
But, so, you love the theme song,
hey,
which
NBC,
I'm pulling up.
If you have any problems with us, I suggest you keep it to yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to tell everybody about Mr. Cosby.
What? All right, so Night Court theme song.
Before you do that.
Snap your W2 and file FedEx.
Oh my God, how humiliating.
Well, now I'm playing an ad on
Yeah.
accident. Oh, and then it pulled up and I exited out. So what did you want to say?
You know, technology is very difficult for some people, folks. You just have to be patient.
There's a reason why I'm the writer on the podcast and not the tech person.
To give you an idea of how big Bill Cosby was, there was an episode of Night Court where Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of NBC at the time.
Oh, yeah, that was on the episode that we're watching right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Brandon Tartikoff shows up, and he's playing Brandon Tartikoff. He's playing the head of NBC.
Yeah, he appears as himself.
Yeah.
I actually had to look that up.
Yeah, and there's a part where he's going off about how powerful he is and how he's the head of NBC and this and that, and Mac answers a phone call and says, "Mr. Tartikoff, there's a Mr. Cosby on the phone for you."
Yeah, I actually wrote this down.
And
Because the joke about the sandwiches.
Yeah, oh my God, the sandwiches!
I forgot to get him his sandwiches and something about sucking on pudding pops. Yeah. I don't remember the exact joke, but yeah, Cosby was huge.
Into pudding pops.
Theo! All right, so here's the Night Court theme.
It's so sad. That man was so funny.
Oh, God.
And she stood up in the delivery room and told everybody that my parents were never married.
Let's get the horrible taste of that moment out of our mouth, listeners. And here is the Night Court theme. All right, we're not going through the entire thing.
Yeah,
but that was just a nice little taste.
But if
of
that
it.
doesn't bring back memories for you, you're obviously not an 80s kid.
And you're just not a cranky old man like Jason, which is fine.
It was weird for years. I thought that theme was written by Mike Post.
Mike Post,
who wrote he wrote every single theme.
You gotta be a little more clear for some of our listeners who may not be as big of a geek as you are.
What, everybody knows Mike Post. Come on.
Poster, I barely even know her.
Come on, you know who Mike Post is, right?
I'm sure I do.
He
but
did.
Not by name.
He did. He did everything. He did the A-Team. He did
the entire A-Team.
Yeah,
Gross.
he did. Yeah, he did every one. He did BA twice.
Oh God.
I would.
Well,
I pity the fool. BA. We should do the A-Team. That's a great show.
I don't want to do the A-Team. I don't need sloppy seconds. But
well, George Papard's dead. But come on, Face Man.
I'm not Ted Bundy, and I'm not into necrophilia. So maybe Face. Okay.
I'd sleep with Face. Everybody would. You know you would.
Oh, anyway.
And
Speaking of sleeping with people. The second episode of Night Court that we actually got into is called A Day in the Life. And what's really funny is that it's kind of got this Rick and Morty's mind blower / interdimensional cable to it, because it's literally an episode where the judge has to get through like 200
cases.
200 misdemeanor cases in a night. And
classic sitcom.
Classic log jam.
Yeah.
Because the whole concept of it is that they have to convict all of these misdemeanors by the end of the night, or else all of their charges will be dismissed at midnight. And they're about 200 cases, and the judge is like, well, even on a good night, all we get through is 80, and there's the conflict. But speaking of sleeping with people, not Face from the A-Team, but this woman, an ex of Dan's, maybe you can shed some light on the situation?
Yeah, basically, Dan, it's a classic Night Court scenario where
Dan wants to be sexy and gross with somebody, but he's got to do his damn job.
If he doesn't get done by midnight, he won't be able to have a quickie with a woman with fantastic hair.
Her name is Sheila.
So
I love that you said fantastic hair and not something else, though.
It's just the 80s hair.
It's some seriously 80s hair.
The 80s hair.
It's just this shy of Flock of Seagulls.
Yeah.
It's magnificent.
Well, I mean, Marky Post, Marky Post is a very, very, very pretty woman. And you watch the show, and it's like, if you look past the hair and the wardrobe, you can see how pretty she is.
The shoulder pads alone.
And I swear, the clothes that she wears, like every jacket she wears, I had an old relative who had a couch that was made out of the exact same fabric.
Oh, yeah, they had to recycle that stuff back in the 80s.
Yeah. But that was, I mean, that is definitely... I'm okay with nostalgia fashion. If somebody wants to dress like it's the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, even kind of the 70s, I'm okay with it. You can do that tongue in cheek. Please, dear God, don't ever let the 80s fashion.
No, we don't need
back.
that. Women don't need boxy shoulders. It's okay. We don't need to look like football players. It's cool.
Yeah.
But
Hairspray, bad.
Hairspray is fine in moderation, ladies, in moderation.
Yeah.
But including the guys, because the Flock of Seagulls haircut doesn't need to make a recurrence. But Dan has a typical, Dan line in the beginning where he and Sheila are sort of bantering about sleeping together. And Sheila is moving, and that's why he's on a deadline to sleep with her, because she's got to catch a flight, blah, blah, blah. She goes, I have a new position. And Dan he responds with, well, will it involve a loss of consciousness? Like, it's just, It's so down and dirty, this show.
I mean, there was actually an episode of Night Court where Dan had to have surgery. In fact, I think it was actually the episode. It was a two-parter. I think it was called Dan's Surgery.
That's deep.
And the whole gist of the episode of the second part is that the doctor tells him, you're going to be okay, but if you do anything strenuous, it could kill you.
Like sex.
So he bangs some woman and ends up in a coma.
Like you do.
And it's just, how would my parents let me watch this?
God.
It's because, Night Court really was sort of the Community of its day. Because the thing about a show like Community is that it's a sitcom, but it's Dan Harmon. It's very obviously not going to follow the normal sitcom rules. It's going to do stuff where like...
Dan Harmon is fantastic with writing autistic spectrum characters.
Well,
Rick Sanchez is essentially a lizard.
Well, yeah, that is true. I mean, there are certain shows and there are certain writers and showrunners who really just they kind of break the rules pretty much every chance they get, and if they do it right, then
the results are absolutely miraculous.
Right. There's a guy named Graham Lennon, and I say Lennon. It's spelled Linehan, and he's the guy he's made some of the best TV shows in the history of television. He did Father Ted, The IT Crowd, Black Books.
Black Books.
But his whole thing is he breaks the rules in his sitcoms.
Okay.
Like one of the things he refuses to do is have a first episode. He'll never have an episode where it's the episode where...
Pilot. Let's introduce everyone.
Yeah, like...
Let's make it boxy and awkward. Yeah,
right,
it's
like,
just...
oh, hey, you just got hired today. Or, hey, you're just moving into the neighborhood.
It's not expositional,
right?
In that sense, yeah.
Yeah, it begins with the characters already fully developed, so...
Makes sense.
Night Court is sort of like that, and I think it's one of the reasons... Seinfeld, great example of a show that breaks every rule in the sitcom narrative.
That's why they're at the top of our spectrum.
Yeah, and it kind of maybe is a message to people who make TV shows, don't play it safe. Do something kind of, loose with the rules.
Yeah, find your voice a little bit later if that's what happens. But
yeah.
You can always firm up the rules, but starting loose is always, honestly, the safest option because then you can take the response and actually go in whatever direction is best for the show overall.
Well, and you have to think of people like Dan Harmon. Okay, so Dan Harmon makes Community. One of my all-time favorite shows. I absolutely love the show.
Community's great. We get it, Jason.
Yes.
Move on.
The people out there who know what I'm talking about get it. But it struggles. It gets canceled. It gets repicked up. It gets canceled. It's a whole big thing. Well, where does he end up? He ends up at Rick and Morty.
Right.
And it's like Dan Harmon sort of evolved into... or his work evolved into Rick and Morty, which is going to last for like 1,000 seasons.
Oh, yeah, especially since it just got one of the craziest renewal deals in recent history for 7 seasons in one deal.
Yeah, which, it deserves it. Rick and Morty is it's a great show.
And speaking of fantastic cartoons, Night Court, I was very impressed that we actually... switched over to the episode Day in a Life because originally we were watching another episode, but we switched to this one. And I discovered in the episode Day in a Life that a Bob's Burgers ploy was predicted by Night Court.
Really?
Oh, yes, because...
Bob's Burgers, one of the... Also, Bob's Burgers...
most fantastic animated series of all time.
Let me ask you this. Is Bob's Burgers the best show on television today? I say it is.
Well, in comparison, or we can get into this debate later.
Yeah.
You know, when our listeners can tweet at us about it. But yes, I would say that this episode of Night Court predicted part of Bob's Burgers, because later in the episode of Night Court, when they're trying to get through all of these misdemeanors, one of them is an 80-year-old woman who is whoring herself out in an old folks home.
Yes.
And all I could think of when I saw that is elderly prostitute. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba! So that I wonder if that's even a nod to Night Court from that episode of Bob's Burgers.
And that joke right there, the whole joke with the old prostitute, where she calls the character witnesses and all the old men rolling
They're
in
wheelchairs, yeah.
And he asks the doctor, he says, "Doctor, were these men this happy before?"
No.
And no, but they could walk.
Yep. And at one point, they're like, wait a minute, so is she trading money for these services? And they're like, sometimes she does it for pudding. And that, like, they do a callback to that at the end of the episode, and Dan has a great sleazy moment paired with this, because he hears that the woman's, trading herself for pudding, and he does unfortunately miss out on hooking up with Sheila, because she falls for one of the weird criminals who comes through the court. She's like, oh, this one guy, she falls for a guy who, quote unquote, takes his time, because he takes about a month to get a sentence out of his mouth.
Yes.
Because they finally hit the deadline. They're on the final...
That was an emo Phillips, was it?
I'm not sure.
Hang on, I gotta look that up.
Do it. But they're on... It's like the second to last or the very last case of the night, and they're about to hit the record for most cases in one evening, and it's great. But then they get this guy who can't talk very quickly, and it's just driving them crazy because they've got 2 minutes left in the night. So you think that guy goes off, and
No,
doesn't.
It was an emo.
Oh, we're so disappointed. I'm gonna back off that ledge now. But so anyway, Sheila ends up ditching Dan, and she goes, "No, I'd prefer a man who takes his time." And she winds up with the guy who can't speak to save his life. And Dan is just like, "Well, I've got to get laid somehow." And there's this kid going around with like boxes and taking orders and stuff for sandwiches and dinner and such. And he looks at Dan and he's like, "Hey, did I get your dinner order?" And Dan's like, "Give me all the pudding you have." Because apparently he's just that desperate.
Yeah, I just realized I knew she looked familiar.
The elderly prostitute?
No, Sheila. Sheila was she was in Spaceballs. She was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was. She was one of President Scroob's. She was the hottie, Well, she wasn't one of the twins, but she was the one who talked about Scotty.
Oh God,
Snotty beaming her all night.
Oh my God, that's magnificent.
That's her. Yeah,
I love it, and she's almost like the Ethel Beavers of this show from Parks and Recreation, where she's just the old pervy lady. It's great.
She's been in a lot. She was in 3 episodes of Deep Space Nine. I tell you, it's so fascinating when you look at some of these actors who you see them for a brief moment or one episode of a TV series.
But they're so memorable, and you're like, I know I've seen that person before.
And you look and you realize this person's got 40 or 50 credits on IMDb.
Oh, but they're almost like an even, like...
I don't think they do that anymore. I don't think that actors... I don't think you see the same actor showing up in 10 or 15 current TV shows anymore.
Not in the same fashion, but big time actors are starting to reverse that. They're flipping the script and say, for instance, I can give you a specific, Matt Damon, who has been a blockbuster actor for, shut up. The point is that he's a star. Is that agreed upon?
Yes.
He's in a movie, he's the star of the movie. So,
she was in The Next Generation also? Sorry.
Anyway,
keep going.
That being said, Matt Damon is usually the star of his films. However, the older he's gotten, the more chill he is. For instance, that's a great way to start is with Team America, where he was, all he could say was his own name. They interviewed him about that, and they interviewed Sean Penn, because Sean Penn was also kind of poorly represented in that movie.
A bit.
When they interviewed Sean Penn about it, he said, "Oh, this movie's a Mara on cinema history, and it's complete crap." And they looked at Matt Damon, who went to Yale for 3 years, and they were like, "How do you feel about this?" And he goes, "I think it's freaking hilarious."
I've known people who went to Yale.
Well,
not impressive.
Well, he's Good Will Hunting, so he lives up to the hype.
Yeah.
But he's doing a reverse role of that, where as opposed to being known for all of these tiny little bit parts that culminate into one big thing.
Right.
He is, like I said, star of his own movies, but he's starting to do little bit parts in movies on his own. He was in Deadpool 2. He was one of the two rednecks sitting in the back of the truck with
Nathan Fillion.
Nathan Fillion.
No, Alan Tudyk.
Yeah, Alan Tudyk. They're
yeah.
both the pot-bellied rednecks sitting in the back of the truck, and Deadpool punches them out or something. But big stars are starting to take little roles like that because they'll make 10 grand a pop for a tiny little appearance. And it just makes sense.
Yeah, and also, many people have said this, and I agree with it. We are in a golden age of television.
Big time.
Television today. I just saw that Richard Gere is in a new BBC show.
Okay.
And it's, you think about it. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, there's no way you would have gotten Richard Gere to be in a television, and now it's a BBC program. It's a limited, 8, 10, whatever episode.
It's a specific amount, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the ladies at, there's a podcast out there called Gilmore Guys, and they had, I think, 2 of the producer or casting ladies on who were talking about how when Gilmore Girls was in its heyday, when they were casting the kind of hunky boys or love interests of Lorelai and Rory, it was impossible to get your Jeffrey Dean Morgans, like your guys who were just, in movies. But then actors have completely switched their tone because television allows them not just to have a family, but to stay with your family for a prolonged period of time, and so on and so on and so forth. Well, so now all these actors are just committing to television shows that give them careers for 5+ years minimum if the show is halfway decent.
Well, you look at somebody like David Tennant. David Tennant is... Oh, God.
David, I love you too.
Look, he is an extremely accomplished actor. He's played...
Hamlet on stage. He's magnificent.
Played Hamlet. He was in Much Ado About Nothing with Catherine Tate.
Is this a Bowery face?
Yeah.
My liege, my liege, my liege, my liege. You're welcome, listeners.
Yeah.
It's a nice little deep cut for you.
But when was the last movie that you saw David Tennant in?
I haven't.
I don't think I have either.
He was on Jessica Jones.
He's
He's
been
villain.
in Broadchurch, the first season. Broadchurch is definitely... It's funny. You watch the first season of Broadchurch, and you are totally in the golden age of television. And then they kept making it, and they need to learn. Stop making shows. When you hit that moment where it's over and it's good, just walk away. As Alton Brown would say.
Drop the mic.
Yeah, just walk away.
Spray, delay, and walk away.
Yeah.
Like you even know what I'm talking about.
I have not a clue.
For all of my Queer Eye fans out there. But, yeah, no, things have definitely switched. Like, even from the time where... It's like you said, they have to change the script every so often. So, like, with a show like Night Court, where it's not about a central love story,
right?
Through the 90s, where that was kind of the theme. And now, movies are not the draw that they once were, because movie theaters have even had to change how they do things, like serving liquor and whatever else to attract people to come.
And it's not fun. And that's the thing. People, the New Year's Eve episode of Night Court, at the very end of the episode, they're watching the ball drop in Times Square. And you look at the tiny little crappy television that they're watching it on. And one of the jokes they actually make is that, boy, these new TVs really bring out the flesh tones. But, yeah, back then movie theaters made sense. Today, I saw an IMAX movie in 3D. And about 15 minutes into it, my
HD is superior to this.
Yeah, it was like this. Why am I watching this on a super big? I don't need to. I don't need to see this. You know? I could watch it at home. And it's kind of an interesting thing because, television, and I was talking to a good friend of mine about this, whenever I was first, at the point where I had money, my own money, and I could piss it away on things without asking my parents about it. One of the things was, home theater.
And hookers.
Not where I was.
Oh, you weren't in New York in the 80s?
No,
my bad.
No, I wasn't in New York in the 80s.
I apologize.
Dan Fielding could have done a whole tour,
Oh, Lord.
That would have been great. That was the pre-Giuliani New York. New York is actually getting a lot more like that now. New York today is a lot closer to New York in the 80s than it was.
Well, Giuliani's not there anymore to police the streets like John Wayne.
But whenever I was, I was able to spend money, it was a question of the home theater. You wanted that surround sound.
You wanted the
beautiful
experience of being at the theater without having to go to the theater.
Right, and now I watch probably half of the things I watch on an iPhone.
Oh, that's a huge thing too, because the screens are so much better. The technology has completely changed, and I remember the last television I got. It takes up a quarter of our living room in our apartment.
Right.
And I told Josh, I was like, so we can just wait for things to come available on streaming, and we don't have to interact with a ton of other people. Well, even Meg, a former guest on our show, you'll remember her from our Hercules episode. She and I received gift cards from a fellow manager of ours at work, and she said, I could go to the restaurant and I could go to the movie theater, or I could order the food on DoorDash and rent the movie on Fandango at home.
Honestly,
it just
by
the time you can avoid the crowd, the hassle.
Well, it is kind of sad because there's a certain experience that comes from scarcity. Like Night Court's a perfect example of this. I mean, I remember as a kid, you wanted to get your homework done before 7:00. I grew up
because that's when your shows came on.
That's when prime time started. Yeah, well, I grew up in the Central Time Zone, so it was 7:00.
Weirdo.
Yeah. Well, which was great though, because when I was a kid, the shows started at 7:00. Like my wife, it's so fascinating. When I was a kid, I watched The Tonight Show. But my wife grew up in the Eastern Time Zone.
When it was too late to stay up.
It was too late for her to stay up and watch The Tonight Show. Yeah.
Well, that's why they even tell, I was listening to the Jeselnik and Rosenthal Vanity Project, JRVP, and Anthony Jeselnik was saying something to the extent that his advisors or whoever he pays to tell him stuff about social media said the best time to post something is during convenient times for Eastern Standard.
Yeah.
And so that it goes right into what you're saying, because it changes for everyone. He was like, but wait a minute. He was like, no, that means I have to be up at 5 a.m. to tweet something, and I'm just not going to do that. No. But when it came to nighttime, it's more convenient because the better shows come on later.
I mean, when I was a kid, and this is the whole TV experience. I mean, in the 80s, you wanted to go see a movie in the movie theater because it genuinely was a vastly superior experience to
100%.
anything.
And it only cost $8.
Right.
As opposed to the $18 per ticket that it costs now.
Yeah. And as a kid, you'd go in there and, you'd get maybe a popcorn and a Coke, and you'd still come out spending like $15.
Yeah.
Tops. But TV, before DVRs,
you only had one TV in your house that you had to share with the rest of your family.
And you had one shot at watching that show.
And if your parents didn't want to watch it, you were hosed.
Yeah, that's it.
So there you go.
Yeah. And so, I mean, like as a kid, I remember, and it was, again, Central Time Zone was cool because, shows that came on at 10:00 for everybody in the Eastern Time Zone, like Quantum Leap, one of my favorite shows as a kid.
You changed the channel, and now I'll never know where he left.
You know where he left.
In case you haven't noticed, we freaking love Bob's Burgers.
Yeah, I'll post a picture of my my recent. I collect fine art, and
all your little Bob's Burgers family collection.
Bob's Burgers
stands near his television in his office.
$15 on Amazon, folks. You can have the whole family.
He's not selling them. He's just telling you where to find them.
I do wish, though, because I did get the Bob's Burgers figures, but the one thing I wish is that it had Teddy. I love Teddy.
I wished my radio worked. Teddy's amazing.
I would be friends with Teddy. You know, I would hang out with him and tell him you're an all right guy.
But would you be best friends with him? Because Bob doesn't even want to be
He's
best
your
friends
best
with
friend.
Best friends till the very end.
He holds your penis when you have that thing.
No, he helps you pee when you have that thing. A guy pulls a knife and you jump in front. Wait, what? We're gonna have to cut all of this.
Nah.
But so you were saying the whole different experience being home versus movie. No, but you said it had to do with Night Court. Why?
Well, yeah, because I mean, Night Court was, you know, it was part of a block. You know, people today,
forget the primetime block.
I don't think there's even a concept of a block anymore where you would start off watching Night Court and then Cheers and then Wings and then Seinfeld and then you'd finish it off with an hour of ER.
Yeah, it was the same concept with
George Clooney's old, man.
He got his start on Roseanne. Yeah, he's old. For sure.
He's an old dude.
Booker on Roseanne.
Yeah.
With the Jerry Curl Uncle Jesse hair before Uncle Jesse was ever a thing.
That's right.
Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, look it up.
Uncle Jesse.
Cut
it out. I know that wasn't him.
No, I was about to say...
that was Dave Coulier.
I was about to say, that's not Uncle Jesse's catchphrase.
Did you ever watch Dave Coulier's...
Have mercy. That's Uncle Jesse.
You know, he had a show, a Canadian skit show.
Oh, God.
I'm
sorry, listeners.
No, it's so weird because they played it on Nickelodeon when I was a kid, but no one I know remembers this show. It was called Out of Control, starring Dave Coulier. It was that was the show where Cut It Out was born.
I remember the catchphrase. I don't remember the show.
Nobody does.
Except for Jason because he's ancient. So
no, but what I'm saying is people my age don't remember it.
Really?
Yeah, it's the weird. I've talked to people. It was on Nickelodeon. They played it like every day on Nickelodeon.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But okay, so what does the block concept have to do with going to the movies and the different experience?
It's a part of it's one of those experiences
where it's almost like a group matinee where it's like 2 for 1, but if you tune in at the right time as opposed
it's one of those experiences that relates to TVs and movies that just doesn't exist anymore. Like going to the movies. I mean, who goes to the movie theater anymore? I mean, how many movies did you see in the theater last year?
Yeah, it's a fair point because, like, when you said with the block stuff, it comes down to even
must-see TV.
Yeah, so with Nick at Night, it used to be like the Wonder Years, and then we move on to Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore. And what really twisted me up is that a show that was popular when I was in high school, known as That 70s Show, is now on Nick at frickin' Night. And it makes me want to burn my TV and throw it off my balcony.
Yeah, you're not young. Yeah, welcome to being old.
At least I'm not as old as you.
Yeah,
but
and you never will be.
Oh, but now Hyde is wanted on sexual allegations. And
what?
Hyde from That 70s Show.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was accused of rape. It was a big deal.
That's
why they kicked him off the Ranch Show with Ashton Kutcher. They didn't renew his contract. And Hyde was my favorite throughout the entire... I was so upset.
Being kicked off an Ashton Kutcher project, is there any greater shame that a human can experience?
I'm not sure. But
that show had Sam... I've never seen The Ranch, but Sam Elliott's on that, isn't he?
Sam Elliott is on it. He's the dad, and Ashton Kutcher is like the Hollywood son. He went off and...
See, and that's...
Or, like, I don't know that he's Hollywood, but he went off and he was like a fancy football player, or it was Garden State, basically. He came back because he had to.
In the Star Wars universe, there's this concept that Yoda went to Dagobah because Yoda was so full of the light side of the Force that in order to hide, he had to go to Dagobah, which was pure dark side, and they would cancel each other out, and he would be effectively invisible.
That makes sense.
That's basically...
So Dagobah was Rick to Yoda's No, Dagobah was the Morty to Yoda's Rick.
Yeah.
Is what you're telling me?
Well, that's basically the ranch, as far as if you take the Force and replace it with cool.
The Force being Sam Elliott, obviously.
Because obviously, you've literally got a show where Sam Elliott, one of the coolest human beings ever, and Ashton Kutcher. And they totally cancel each other out, and it's like the show doesn't even exist.
Well, and Sam Elliott was on Justified and Parks and Recreation, just like John Larroquette, because apparently this is a show about Night Court, which we can't stay on topic with. But,
This is on topic.
Well, I think part of the reason is that we're drinking such delicious beers that we get distracted. You know, our favorite beers from Variant, like the Raspberry Lemon Goza. And what are you drinking there, Jason? The same beer as always?
Same beer as always. I love this. This is the Norcross Street IPA.
That's right. Our favorite beers from Roswell, downtown Roswell.
And let's see, this beer that I'm drinking came out and was bottled on the 26th of January. So this was in a keg or in a tank.
About 5 days ago.
5 days ago.
Yep.
That is...
It's very fresh.
And you can taste it. Variant makes some of the best beers, and I love it. It's a local business. It's family owned.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's family owned.
My friends, the Curlings, own it.
Yeah, and, I know, obviously, look, we're in the podcast world, so... we're not talking to people who live in the same area as us. We get that. But if you ever are, for some reason, in the Georgia area, north of Atlanta, south of Tennessee,
that general neighborhood.
Go, if you like beer, go check out these people, Variant Brewing. And, I was actually at a restaurant. There's a restaurant called...
You were a restaurant?
Yes, I was, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, I see.
No, I was at a restaurant.
Fui un restaurante.
Coalition
Yes.
is a restaurant here in Alpharetta. Fantastic restaurant. One of the best restaurants in Alpharetta. I had Variant there. And it was the first time I had actually been able to order it at a restaurant. And I made sure to tell the manager, I said, the problem is you don't have enough of it.
Take note. Yeah. I ordered this because it's from Variant.
Yeah, you need to get 2 or 3 more of their beers. Get it on your menu.
Pronto. Well, they're actually pretty ubiquitous in the Roswell area. That a lot of restaurants are starting to serve their beers.
Really? See, that was the first time I'd encountered it.
You were in Alpharetta.
Well, why would I go to Roswell? I live in Alpharetta.
Because Variant's in Roswell. So
I know.
But yes, we are enjoying some of our favorite beers from Variant. So hello, Matt and Lauren Curling. Thank you for the deliciousness.
I looked up something in Roswell the other day.
Do tell.
And
it doesn't have anything to do with aliens because we're not in New Mexico.
No.
Oh, damn it.
No, this is the funny thing. There was a story about Roswell, New Mexico. And it had something to do with the alleged crash that happened, blah, blah, blah. But the picture that they had, whoever wrote this article on whatever blog, had just evidently gone to Google Images and typed Roswell. And the picture they got was the exit sign for the Roswell that said Roswell and Dahlonega. And that was...
Dahlonega?
Is that what it is?
Yes.
God, I've been saying...
He's from Louisiana, so let's go ahead and give him a break. But yes, it's Dahlonega, Georgia.
Dahlonega?
Yes,
no,
sir.
They totally should pronounce it the way I do.
It's not Talladega, it's Dahlonega.
Dahlonega. Is Cumming pronounced just straight up Cumming? Am I right about that?
Yes, it is. Cumming, Georgia.
Cumming, Georgia. Cumming, Georgia.
Unfortunately, yes.
Right.
I don't think they thought too hard into that
They
one.
really, really didn't think that one through.
No.
Sort of like the... Well, no.
We're going to have to cut like half of this show.
No. Well, we haven't offended...
we just offended Cumming.
Oh, come on. Like we're the first people to say that.
Probably not. Yeah, we haven't offended any nations this evening.
No, we haven't offended any races, nationalities, creeds, colors.
Except maybe sumo wrestlers, but that was Night Court's doing, not ours.
Yeah, no, we didn't do that, though. We didn't.
No, we didn't.
And to be fair, we actually said that was a little campy and...
It was a little...
Yeah, that was
ridiculous.
A little over the top,
But, okay, so let's get back on topic. Once again, shout out to Variant. Thank you for all the lovely distractions while we try to record. We love it. But, so Jason, let me ask you, why did you pick Night Court? What is it about this show that, makes you flash back and think, That's the show.
Well, looking back at the 80s, looking back at the sitcoms, well, not even sitcoms, just television programs from the 80s, there are shows that stand up that hold up. There's shows
Unlike
like
Alf.
Well, yeah, unlike Alf. Unsolved Mysteries stands up. Quantum Leap, I don't know. I really hope it does, but
You'll never know where he lived.
I'm terrified to find out if it holds
I
up.
wouldn't either.
But Night Court was one of those shows that I wanted to take the risk on to see. When I was a kid, it sounds silly, and I freely admit that this sounds silly, but my mom, Thursday night, I think that was when Night Court came on. That was one of the nights where, because we had like a meal, we knew what our meals were, our dinners were going to be kind of during the week.
Based on the night, yeah.
Yeah.
Meatloaf night, pizza night, yeah.
And I remember, like, 1,000 times as a kid, having a chicken breast with Velveeta shells and cheese.
Classy as shit.
sitting at the little island in our kitchen watching the tiny ass little TV that was on top of our refrigerator.
Because they used to be about 5x5 children.
Yeah.
Those tiny little TVs. I
and
remember those.
it probably weighs as much as the 65-inch TV I have today.
Oh, yeah.
Which probably also cost about half as much.
Yep. That's why you held on to a television for 12 years back in the day, because it was worth that kind of money.
My mom still has that TV, still on top
That's
of the refrigerator.
magnificent.
Yeah.
Tell her to text me a picture of it.
Yeah.
I need to see it.
But I remember as a kid sitting and watching Night Court, eating that meal, and it's so funny because as a kid from the 80s, you watch the Goldbergs. People who didn't grow up in the 80s don't get what TV and movies meant to us. It was a part of our life.
Oh, even in the early 90s, like that was how I got exposed to Star Wars properly, because it might be on the television, but you had to know when it was playing based from, what the TV guide told you, so on and so on and so forth. Otherwise, you were going to miss 3/4 of it or whatever, and you just catch when Luke loses his hand at the end of Empire. But you go to the movie and you get to experience the entire thing in color, no less, because sometimes, the TVs that your parents held on to were still black and white.
Yeah, you didn't have to worry about vertical hold.
And the dial, because the youngest kid in the room had to get up and change the dial. There was no remote to some of these old-ass televisions that we had in our houses back in the day.
But it's really hard to overstate the importance, and I don't know why. I genuinely don't. I don't know why it is for this generation, for my generation, why it was so significant. There's a blog that I read every day called The War Zone. It's over at thedrive.com, and Tyler Rogaway. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's the sort of the head guy there, and he wrote an article, I think it was last week, about Airwolf. And about how Airwolf shaped his entire life.
Wow.
And I just thought, and you read the comments and you see so many different people in the comments saying essentially the same thing, is to a lesser degree. But I really don't think people who didn't grow up in the 80s realize how those shows, Unsolved Mysteries had an impact on my life. I went into, eventually, working in, criminal investigations.
Because of Unsolved Mysteries.
Because of Robert Stack and Unsolved Mysteries.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, that was the beginning. Just like with Tyler, Airwolf started him down the path of, now he's a fantastic blogger. He produces the absolute best defense-related blog articles you'll ever read. And it started with an 80s TV show.
Well, that's where your influences came from back in the day. I remember when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a Dalmatian when I grew up because of 101 Dalmatians. Now, my parents quickly stomped that idea out. They're like, no, you're a person, not a dog. That's not going to happen. And I was like, but that's my dream. You said I could be whatever I wanted to be.
Yeah, but we lied, honey.
Oh, okay. Plus, you're a woman. What are you ever going to be?
By the way, Santa Claus...
Wait, what about Santa Claus? What are you trying to tell me?
No, I'm just talking about the lies your parents tell you.
Wait, what about Santa Claus, Jason? Are you
He's
trying
gay.
to...
He's not really married to Mrs. Claus.
I've got to go. I've got to go commit suicide right now.
No, Santa and the elves? Do you think they work there because they want to?
I mean, I saw that episode of Family Guy, so probably not. Because they're inbred to the point where Stewie can saw one of their little arms off without them even noticing.
Yeah.
It's very sad. So on that note, this has been Night Court, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, yeah, Night Court. Great show.
Yeah, the show that Jason picked but could not possibly talk about for the entire episode.
Come on.
Yeah,
it's a whole 80s TV experience. That's the thing.
Hey, Dan got all of his pudding. There was an elderly prostitute.
Yes.
There was a kid with mirrors looking up a 30-year-old woman's skirt. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
All in all, like I said, I came into this show with fresh eyes because I'd never heard of it, never seen it, and I even confused it with the People's Court with the da-da-dun-dun.
I know. Yeah, that you should tell that story.
That's a very, very different...
The whole time I'm talking about, we need to do Night Court. It's a great show. It's all this.
Why? Didn't the neighbor just like cut the other neighbor's hedges and now they're mad about it? Like I don't even know. Oh, he shot my dog in the middle of the night.
Which they did some Judge Wapner jokes on Night Court. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't know. Like I said, I only watched these 2 episodes, so it was fun to come into a show
that was back when the courtroom television show had a measure of dignity and decorum about it.
Well, then came Judge Judy and
Judge Joe Brown
and Judge Purd and
Judge
Parks
who?
and Purd on Parks and Recreation. I am a judge. Judge Purd is not a judge.
I watched half of Parks and Rec.
Oh. You have to watch all of Parks and Rec.
I know. I need to. I do. I need to.
2 words. Nick Offerman.
I know. He's great. He's absolutely friggin' great.
I know the man. I met him in real life. Well, and Megan Mullally. And that's 2 other words to watch that show. It's amazing.
Well, okay. All right.
All right, listeners, you heard it here first. I'm going to watch Community, and Jason's going to watch Parks and Recreation.
She's lying. She's not really going to do it. And, by the way, I've seen half of Parks and Rec, so...
I've seen a few episodes of Community.
Yeah,
Get
but
over
you got to
it.
watch them all in order.
You know what? Anyway, this has been a very exciting episode where we could not possibly stay on topic the entire time. At any rate, listeners, thank you for joining us once again for Hindsight is Horrifying. You can actually see a whole one of our episodes as of right now because we're terrible at keeping up our website.
Well, by the time we post this one...
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
I mean...
Because we can't post this one until we post the one before it.
I mean, so you say, but we're just so slow at everything. Regardless, where can they reach us, Jason?
Hindsighthorrifying.com. That is going to be the place where you can find all of our episodes. We are also on YouTube. We're also on Twitter. Darth, what is
my Twitter handle?
What is your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is at Darth_Jader_. Our Hindsight is Horrifying Twitter account is actually Hindsight Horror. So we've got 2 different Twitter accounts going now. So if you just want to put me on blast personally, you can on my Twitter, or you can make suggestions and tell us how terrible this podcast is at Hindsight Horror on Twitter. You can also reach me at Darth Jader at hindsightishorrifying.com. We love to hear your suggestions for future episodes, whether we're just nerding out, kind of like what we did over Night Court, and maybe we can do a sort of a blend episode where we bring up all the adult jokes that we missed as kids. But Jason, where can they email you all the hate mail? Because that's where all the hate mail goes, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I love the hate mail.
It fuels his soul.
It fuels me. Yeah. Jason at hindsighthorrifying.com. I'm on Twitter, but you'll have to find me. I'm not going to tell you.
Find my Twitter and you'll find his Twitter.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah. No.
Until-
If you find me, if you want to find me on Twitter, I am at North Foggy. NORTHFOGGY. North Foggy.
It's a lie, listeners. Don't listen to that lie. But thank you for joining us once again. This has been Hindsight is Horrifying. This is Darth, Jader, and Jason saying thank you and good night.
Good night. Do 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 round do 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 do. Bam bam boom boom bam 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 boom bam bam bam